G'day ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Draw with Jazza. I'm Jazza and today I'm going to go through how to draw environments, backgrounds and landscapes for your illustrations and animations and whatnot. Now before I get stuck into it, I do need to preface with the fact that I obviously can't cover everything in thick, rich detail in this video. It's a pretty broad video on basically how to draw them yourself, but there's a lot of elements that go into drawing environments, things like perspective, line work, texture, composition, and all of that stuff. And I highly recommend you check out a set of videos I've done called The Fundamentals of Drawing, where I cover those things and more. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about perspective or a little bit more about composition, I definitely recommend checking that out. In this video, we're going to talk a little bit more about how to lay out the scene itself and draw things and how to light things with each other and basically create a landscape image from start to finish. And I'm going to create two environments in this video. The first is going to be a forest and a natural landscape, and the second is going to be a little more rigid, a little more populated, a more urban-ish, maybe medieval landscape. So to start off with, we're going to draw a bit of a forest environment, but when I was talking about not being able to cover everything entailed in drawing environments, this is a clear example, because when you say, let's say we draw a forest, there are loads of different kinds of trees or moods of forest. Is it a scary, evil forest or a beautiful, tranquil summer forest? Is it nighttime or daytime? Is it snowy, autumn, winter, or spring? And then think of all the types of trees that you're creating. So there are so many different ways to approach environments and backgrounds. And the first thing to really pin down is what you're trying to convey. So let's go for a bit of a fairy tale feel, just so we can have a bit of an interesting environment. I want really long, tall trees, a bit of moss all over the ground and some bushes and stuff. But I also want a little bit of a clearing so you can see a little bit of a hut. We don't know what the hut will be too. It won't be one of the main features, but it will be a visual highlight. And that's one of the things we need to do when we create environments, background images, is create visual highlights. And the first thing I do is do what's called blocking, where you really roughly sketch in where things are going to be placed and you compose or pre-compose the image. So to start off with, I pick a horizon line and then I start to really roughly block in the trees. And when I say block in, I'm really basically just drawing cylindrical or cylinder shapes and not even very cleanly, in a really casual and relaxed way, just placing rough positions of things and where I think they'll go. As it starts to be put together, we put in some little highlights, little areas of interest that we can direct people's attention towards, such as the house and a deer off in the corner there. And then as we build up the scope of the picture, we can add more into the distance of the background, such as a mountain in the far distance, and then position something like a path. So this is my very, very rough blocking, and I'm not done with my blocking yet, but I just thought I'd take a break and sort of talk through the sort of things that I'm doing. And as you can see, they're very, very tall trees. It's a pretty open looking forest because we're looking sort of through it as if it's a sort of a channel through, and then we can sort of see it's almost like a hallway or a corridor of a forest, because then we open up into the distance where we see this mountain. Now there are a couple of things. First, I want to fix up this hut. I feel like I've put it in facing the wrong way. So one of the benefits of creating digital art is I can just select all of this and flip it horizontally, and I'll just move it here like that and erase the tree behind it there. So you can see that I've still got this little path heading towards a house, and the house isn't like a main feature because it's sort of hidden behind a tree, but it is sort of adding some visual interest. So now I'm going to break down my composition into a few elements, and there are three main things. There's the background, the midground, and the foreground. The background is essentially everything through this clearing that we see behind. So all these mountains here in the distance and the sky. The foreground are things like these trees that are placed right at the front here. And as you can see, we've sort of used them to frame the picture and pull the eye in towards the background. Foreground elements are usually elements that help in the storytelling or the framing of the image. So you might, for example, have this deer right in the foreground with its head looking off into the distance there, but I didn't want the deer to be a major prominent feature of the image, so I sort of pushed him back there, and he's in the midground. And the midground is sort of what you might refer to as the stage of the image. It's where most of the storytelling usually takes place. As I sort of mentioned, the foreground helps frame and help sometimes storytell with the image, and the background is a huge element in terms of conveying scale and also setting. So the fact that I have these big mountains shows that we're in the wilderness, obviously, and that there's also a scale of grandeur to an extent because the mountains are so tall and scaling. And I'm also going to add in here some more forest as it continues off into the distance. So it helps bridge that gap between the midground and the background. So this is pretty much all of my basic blocking done to a place where I'm pretty happy with it. And the basic blocking really only needs to be the silhouettes. So we've created the canopy for the trees, and we've only really drawn some straight lines to communicate where the tree trunks are going to go. And now we can go through and start to add some of the details. So for example, we can start to add branches, and all of these tree trunks are all very straight. So the next thing I want to talk about is organic lines. So when you're drawing environments and stuff, there is no forest that looks as straight and perfect as this. Even ones with very tall, very straight trees, you will want to draw these lines by hand as you go through and do the final line work. We're not up to the final line work yet, but I'm just sort of pointing that out so you know, to make sure that your images have an element of natural flaws, so they feel really organic. The next thing I want to do is add some more areas of interest. So for example, I'm going to add a big rock here at the front. This is in the foreground, as you can see, once again, to sort of help frame this image and bring the eye in towards the center where this corridor is going through, but also to break it up a bit because it's a bit empty and we really want to make sure that the eye has things to look at. We want to use asymmetry in our favor. So for example, here, I'm going to add some toadstools and mushrooms. These will help add a sort of fantasy element to the image, but it's also important to keep in mind that there is some variation and contrast in how much detail and how many objects that you put into a scene. So in this image, I have a lot that's happening over here and a lot that's happening over here. By doing this and keeping this area in the middle fairly simple, we sort of help guide the image towards the back, which helps communicate that sense of scale, and also is nice and asymmetrical, so this corridor isn't in the dead center of the image, it's a little off to the left. So having this big rock here a little off to the right sort of helps balance that out. This is all pretty subconscious stuff though, like I wouldn't necessarily have sat down and decided how to make it asymmetrical. You just sort of make it a little bit naturalistic. You just sort of improvise your way through it and make sure that it's nice and flawed and nice and natural, and these things will sort of help make themselves. But I guess my main point with that is to have areas of concentrated detail. So we have areas of concentrated detail and areas which let the eye rest. So now that I've blocked the whole image to a place that I'm happy with, I'm gonna go through and sketch the final sketch. Now this is all gonna be pretty rough still because I really want that nice rough looking, but I will go through with my pencil tool and add a bit of detail and make it look a little more final. Now when I say go through with my pencil tool, this is what I'll be using. It's my drawing pencil in my custom brush set. These are my custom brushes over here. If you're interested in checking them out, they have things like ink brushes, paint brushes, and sketching pencils and things like that. So this is my construction pencil, this blue pencil, and then I'll be using my drawing pencil to do the details on top. You can check them out at JAZZA'Sstudios.com. There's a link on the screen and in the description. Okay, so I have the background now to a place where I'm happy with it, and you can see that there are a lot of different little things that are there that weren't in my initial blocking sketch. Because the blocking was basically to position and sort of proportion things against each other and sort of set things up so that we're guiding the eye in a way that we want to. When we're putting in the details, we can really start to have a little bit of fun. So I started to add a lot of texture to things like the trees. As you can see in the background here in the forest, I built up a lot of this foresty feel by just drawing a lot of these vertical lines, and this really makes it look thick and rich, full of trees. I also added texture to the rock here in the foreground and a lot more detail in the midground and background. All of the trees were drawn freehand because I wanted to make sure that we have this really naturalistic feel. And I also, when I draw a line, I don't just draw like a straight line, I draw little portions of a straight line, and then every now and then I sort of jut out a bit like that. And that helps create a really nice naturalistic feel. So now to finish off this image, I'm just gonna do a little bit of grayscale coloring to help convey a little bit more about how to color between the foreground and background and midground. So first things first, I'm gonna select my oil paintbrush from my custom brush set, and I'm gonna really darkly color in all of the foreground objects. Again, this can be done really nice and rough, like I've done the line work in the background sketch, simply because we're creating something of a concept art piece rather than a really detailed, refined environment art piece. Another thing that I'm going to mention is that when I went through and did more of my refined sketching, I drew the environment from the foreground towards the background. So again, I started off with these trees that are closest to the viewer, with these rocks, and then with these details. And then in the very end, I did things like all the little trees in the background and the very far distant horizon. That works best because as you draw objects in the foreground, it's easier to know what to hide and where to draw the things behind those. Whereas if we draw the background images first, we don't quite know how big or what shapes the foreground pieces will be, and we might end up painting ourselves into a bit of a corner and not giving us much room to breathe there. So I've painted in these objects a bit darker, and now I'm going to select a little bit more of a middle tone and just paint the entire layer underneath with that. So I have this mid-tone gray, and then I'm going to select a much lighter tone and I'm going to paint that into the very far background. Again, this is all pretty rough sort of stuff. Now, working with environments, there's something called atmospheric perspective, which means the further away something is, the more it blends into the color of the atmosphere. So if you have a blue sky, with atmospheric perspective, mountains far, far in the distance and trees far in the distance are gonna get more of a blue hue. And the closer they are to you, the less that is apparent. In my illustration here, I could help convey this by erasing to a lower opacity these trees and mountains in the background, and that will sort of blend them further back into the horizon. So now I'm just basically going to roughly paint in some highlight areas, whatever is sort of exposed to the light from the distant sun in the horizon. And that would normally be things like the trunks of the trees facing this direction, some of the tree canopies, and of course we can create a bit of a gradient on the ground leading away from this area. And this again helps pull the eye towards that horizon area. So I've got the basic coloring in a place that I'm pretty happy with. Maybe I'll add a little more highlight to this cabin, but I'm going to select my dark color again, and I'm just going to go in these very back trees, all hidden in the back there. Basically, wherever I have all these straight lines and no detail, I'm going to fill these in with a bit of a darker color. And that will help create some contrast because it'll make some of the trees stick out that are more in the foreground, and it'll make the back forest area really look nice and thick and a little bit mysterious. All right, so I'm nearly done with the shadow. I'm just gonna get my darker brush and make it a little larger and just cover some of the underneath the canopy of this forest tree area up here. And I'm also gonna shade in some of the ground to make it look like you have a bit of a shadow casting from the light in the horizon. So I'm pretty happy with that. The very last thing I'm going to do to really make this pop is select a bright white, and with my brush I'm just going to go right on the edges of these objects in the very close foreground. So anything that again would be in direct contact with that light area, and this is going to really help make it stand out and help frame that image in a really strong way. It'll add a nice element of contrast in the lights and darks, And we can also use it to help highlight textures. So on this rock, I can follow a couple of cracks. We can also use it in a nice uneven way to make it look organic. So there you go. From start to finish, this is how I created this forest concept environment sketch, starting off with the blocking, then going through the sketching, adding some of the details after we've composed it in a way that we're happy with, drawing it from the foreground to the background, and then adding the lighting and atmospheric shading. And look at this, we have a blank canvas all over again. We're going to start again, and this time we're going to do a little bit more of a populated environment. We're going to do a medieval town. Now, in one of these sorts of images, we're going to be using perspective a lot more. So we start off by drawing a horizon line, and then I'm going to pick a couple of points for perspective. Let's just draw out a few lines. It doesn't have to be perfect, they just need to all sort of coincide in the same sort of direction, just so we have something to follow, and it'll give me sort of a base to sort of begin with. And now when I do the blocking, I literally do the blocking. I'm just going to draw blocks and just pretend that there are going to be buildings there. So as you can see, I've really just thrown in a bunch of boxes, but these are representing house shapes, obviously. So I have here what's going to be a house, and I might put a door here, and I can basically go through now and start to rough in some of the details of where some of the stuff is going to go. So if this is an upper story of a house, I might have one long window on the front here, again following my perspective lines. Might have two windows along here, so just break that up like that. And this box in the middle is just sort of a placeholder to represent a well. So I'm going to draw in the ellipses inside this box that make up the well shape, and then I might draw a frame on the well so that you can see that it's a well and it's got a bucket string on there and maybe like a little lever thing. So I get to just go through now and add all of these sorts of details, and then I'll be ready to go through and do the sketches. But something that's a bit different with this sort of sketch as opposed to the forest sketch is, aside from just having the blocking done and then adding detail and then getting ready to sketch, we've also got to add some busyness. So by doing this, we can sort of essentially rough in where people are going, where horses and carts are going, and that's where a lot of the detail is going to be. Now, of course, because we're doing an environment concept, I won't do too many people in the foreground. I think the closest sort of person I do will be about this size, and we can just basically rough them in to start off with a bit of a stick figure, and then we can just sort of fill that out with our little sketching shading. And we can add a cart in the foreground to sort of help add some interest here. Add some other interesting details. Maybe make this a church, so we'll make the roof a bit steeper. Add a cross on top like so. So we're keeping it all really rough and really loose and just sort of throwing in a whole bunch of these details and starting to define the features. So for example, we might rough in where these sort of slotty things are. I know there's a name for them, and people who are medieval enthusiasts will laugh at me or scoff at me, but basically draw those jutty, uppy, downy bits. And you can see the image sort of coming together as you add this detail in. Now, I'm not going to go crazy and do all of it. I want to hurry up and move ahead to some of the sketching. So to do this, once again, I start a new layer. I get out my drawing pencil, which looks like that, and I'm going to go through and sketch in the basics. But I'm going to sort of ignore the construction areas that obviously don't have anything to do with what the final geometry will be. But then I'm going to come back later and add in all the details. So I've gone through and added the main geometry to my image, and it's now ready for the detail, and I can hide my construction lines and just go nuts. I'm also going to add those figures and silhouettes of people so it feels a little bit more like a busy town. And I'm also going to use my pencil to shade in darker areas that are completely void of light, and then at the end I'm going to go through and add my shading after the texture and detail. Now when I say adding detail, I mean essentially finding things like, let's say, this well, and very lightly putting in an organic sort of rounded line to indicate those layers of bricks, and then drawing the divisions of the bricks in here, and doing this sort of thing through the whole image, identifying areas that need to have their own areas of detail, dividing them and differentiating them from other aspects of the image. So for example, these houses will be sort of Tudor houses, so I can go through and add these wood areas that have that subdivided Tudor look. Things like texture on the ground, frames on the windows, so on and so forth. So I've got all my geometry done, all my details are roughed in, and now I'm ready to add some shading. So the first thing I want to do is select my paintbrush. And first I'm going to pick areas that have the most shading. So to do this, I need to find a direction of light. So let's say the light is coming in this direction. This side wall here will be darker than that front facing wall, as will this side of the church building. We'll go through and shade that. Again, this is a concept sort of image, so it can be pretty rough and still get the look and feel across that I want to get. So now I can select a slightly lighter color that's still going to act as a shadow, and I'll color the underside of these roofs here, just there so it's casting a shadow. The underside of this well, and then of course, because this is a rounded shape, this is going to have much more of a gradient going into the shadow. And then everything behind the well is going to be a little bit hidden, so I'm going to just color it in like that. This cart in the corner is really close in the foreground, so I'm going to make it nice and dark. And I'm going to do the same with these buildings far on the left. Now you can't really see that they're buildings, but they're basically buildings that are acting as a silhouette to help frame the image. I'm going to select a very near white and paint the silhouette of this castle here, and I'm going to do what I did with my forest piece and really bring the line work of this castle to be almost translucent. So by doing this, it throws it far into the background, and we can see that we have the silhouette of the castle thingy, but it's so far away that it's all melded off into the horizon. I'm going to color everything behind this gate this nice dark color so that it looks like it's sort of an interior in there, and then I'm going to select my eraser and then just lightly bring back some of these bars. But you'll notice they sort of look like they're jumping forward a bit too much. I'm going to get my shading color again and just draw a line there, and you can see that it looks like there's a shadow cast on the top of these bars from the top of that castle wall. Going to go through, add a little bit more shading to the castle wall, shadow cast from that top layer of bricks. Same thing up here. Just trying to make everything look sort of like it's all part of the same environment and image. Everything affects one another. And then the last thing I'm going to do is paint the ground, and I'm going to make it darker in the foreground and slowly blend it out until it mixes in with the white of the horizon and the sky in the distance. And last but not least, I'm going to cast some shadows on the ground. So I'm going to select a much darker color, and I'm going to make it a very short shadow, and I'm just basically painting in on the ground here on the sides that are a distance from where the light is being thrown. And that actually includes these sides of the buildings here. So I'm actually going to create a large shadow area that goes along this whole ground section, and this is going to reinforce that universal lighting. Do the same with the well, add a cast shadow there. It's all pretty rough, as you can see. I'm not really being too elegant about it. I'm just trying to make sure that all the basics are covered. And now I've finished. I've gotten it all into a place where I'm really happy with it. I have my finished forest. It's all a bit darker and moodier. It's a bit more mysterious. And then I have a brightly lit daytime medieval town. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video tutorial on how to draw environments and backgrounds. Just to recap some of the more important points, basically we start off by blocking it, roughing it out, and finding where we want the main objects to go and how we want to guide the eye. Then we can start to add a bit of detail, refine the geometry, and over time create the finished landscape/environment image, whereupon we can create shading and add some color and things like that. And remember, of course, things like atmospheric perspective, where the further things are away from us and the thicker the atmosphere, the more the distant objects sort of blend in with the color of the atmosphere. So if there's a red sky and there's a castle far in the distance, then that castle is going to be more and more tinted in that red hue. Otherwise, that's basically it. I hope you enjoyed the video tutorial. Once again, if you're interested in these brushes that I've used through the tutorial to do the sketching and basic roughing and filling in, they're a lot nicer to use than the default Photoshop brushes, and I've crafted them to be used by myself for everything that I do basically. So if you want to check them out, definitely go to the JAZZA'S Studios shop where you can see them there. Otherwise, thanks for joining me, ladies and gentlemen, and until next time, I'll see you later. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to my channel to see new content every week. Check out more of my stuff by clicking the annotations over there. If you want to support my work and get a few goodies for yourself, head over to my store for archives, ebooks, and get yourself something nice. That's it for now, and until next time, see you later.